The day I signed my discharge papers, my mother called to tell me she was proud of me for finally coming home. I remember standing in the parking lot outside the VA office in Richmond, Virginia, phone pressed to my ear, watching a sparrow hop across the asphalt like it had nowhere important to be. My mother's voice was warm, relieved, like I had just survived something embarrassing rather than 2 tours in Afghanistan. "We can finally plan the wedding now," she said. "Your father already talked to Pastor Gaines. I had been engaged to Marcus for 14 months. 14 months of FaceTime calls that cut out in the middle of sentences. 14 months of him saving the details. The flowers, the venue, the cake. In a shared Google Doc he updated every time he found something he thought I'd like. He never once pushed me to set a date while I was deployed. He just kept adding to the document, quietly, the way good people do things. "Mom," I said, "Marcus and I are planning it ourselves." The silence that followed was the kind my mother had perfected over 34 years. It wasn't angry, it was just empty enough to make you second-guess yourself. "Of course," she said finally. "Of course you are. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, the second of 3 kids, the only daughter. My father was a retired postal worker who ran our house like a logistics operation. Schedules, expectations, consequences. He was not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier if he were. He was the kind of man who showed love by managing things, and when you stopped needing to be managed, he didn't quite know what to do with you. My older brother, Devin, had married at 22, a woman my parents adored, and they'd bought a house 3 miles from my parents' place. My younger brother, Tyler, was still in that comfortable orbit, too, living at home at 26, working at the auto shop my father's friend owned, borrowing money with a casualness that my parents seemed to find endearing rather than concerning. I had joined the army at 19, not out of rebellion. I genuinely believed in it. Still do. But the effect on my family was the same as if I had slammed a door in their faces. My mother cried at the airport. My father shook my hand. 8 years later, I came home with a combat medic badge, a fiancé I loved, and apparently a lot of catching up to do on other people's expectations. Marcus and I set the date for the 2nd Saturday in October. We found a venue in Charlottesville, an old restored barn on a farm property. The kind of place that looked like it had always been meant for something meaningful. We put down a deposit. We hired a photographer. We sent out invitations in late June with a handwritten note inside each one, because Marcus had insisted on that detail and I had learned, by then, to trust his instincts about warmth. My parents received their invitation. My brothers received theirs. My father called me the following Sunday. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said, which was always how the conversations that mattered began. "We think Charlottesville is a long way for the family." Charlottesville was 2 hours from Chesapeake. I'd done 2 tours in a landlocked country 12 time zones away, but sure, 2 hours was a long way. "It's where we want to get married, Dad." "We're not saying change it. We're just saying it's a lot to ask people." "I'm not asking people. I'm inviting them. There's a difference." Another silence. A different kind this time. The kind that meant the conversation had been decided before it started, and he was just waiting for me to figure that out. "We'll talk about it more when you come for Sunday dinner," he said. I didn't go to Sunday dinner. Marcus and I had already made plans with his family, and I was not going to cancel them to sit at a table where I would be calmly renegotiated. I texted my mother to explain. She responded with a single okay and a period, which in my family's language was the equivalent of a declaration of war. The weeks leading up to the wedding were quieter than they should have been. My mother texted occasionally, a photo of a recipe, a link to a news article, normal things, but she never asked about the wedding. My father didn't text at all. Devin said he and his wife were coming, and I felt a specific kind of relief at that. Tyler said he thought he could make it, which I had learned over the years meant no. 3 weeks before the date, my father called again. "We're not coming," he said. Just like that. Not a question, not a conversation. A statement. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Marcus was in the kitchen. I could hear him moving around, opening the refrigerator. The ordinary sounds of our ordinary life together. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer was not going to be something I could argue with, because it was never actually about logistics or distance or any of the concrete things. It was about something that didn't have a name, something to do with control and the loss of it, and the way my father had never found a different language. "Your mother isn't up for the trip," he said. My mother was 61 and in good health. She had driven to Myrtle Beach and back the previous spring. "Okay," I said. "You understand. I understand what you're telling me." He paused. "That's not the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." October came. Marcus picked me up that morning. We'd spent the night separately at the insistence of his grandmother, who had opinions about tradition, and drove me to the farm in his father's old Bronco with the windows down, even though it was 52 degrees and I had a veil in my lap. And I was laughing at something he'd said, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, I realized I was completely, absolutely fine. Devin and his wife Karen were there. His kids ran around the lawn in their little dress clothes and got grass stains almost immediately. Marcus's family filled the other side of the aisle, his parents, his 2 sisters, his grandmother in the front row with a corsage she bought herself because she said no one ever thought to get the grandmother's corsages. My maid of honor, Priya, who had been my battle buddy at Fort Campbell and had driven from Nashville without being asked twice, fixed my veil in the bathroom of the barn and told me I looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "I'm terrified," I said. "That's the same thing," she said. My father did not walk me down the aisle. I walked myself, slowly, to the opening notes of a song Marcus and I had picked together on a Tuesday night in February, with takeout containers on the coffee table and his laptop between us. And I want to be honest about what that felt like, because the easy version of this story would be to say it was empowering, that I held my head high and felt strong. The truth is, it was both things at once. It was sad, and I was happy. And both of those things were real. Marcus cried before I even reached him. His grandmother fanned herself with the program. We came back from our honeymoon, 5 days in the Smoky Mountains. Neither of us had wanted anything extravagant, to a voice message from my father on my phone. I stood in the driveway still holding my bag and listened to it. He did not mention the wedding. He did not say congratulations. What he said was that Tyler was getting married in the spring, that the family was planning a celebration dinner, and that he hoped Marcus and I would be able to attend and contribute toward the occasion. Contribute was the word he used. I stood there for a long moment. A neighbor walked by with a dog. The dog looked at me. I looked at the dog. Marcus came around from the back of the car and saw my face. "What?" he said. I played him the message. He listened to the whole thing without saying anything. When it ended, he took my bag from my shoulder and said, "Come inside. We'll figure it out together." That was the thing about Marcus. He never told me what to do. He just made sure I didn't have to figure things out alone. We talked about it for a long time that night. He never once told me to cut them off or to forgive them or to do anything in particular. He just asked me what I actually wanted, underneath everything, and listened while I tried to answer. What I wanted was for my father to have called to say he was sorry he missed it. That was all. That was the whole thing. He hadn't. I texted my father back the next morning. "Congratulations to Tyler. I can contribute $1. Best wishes." I put my phone face down on the counter and made coffee. He called 11 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, clipped, precise, and it said that he found my response disrespectful, that this was family, and that he expected better. I thought about calling back. I thought about it for most of that day. Marcus came home from work and found me at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, and he sat across from me and said nothing, which is sometimes the most generous thing a person can do. I didn't call back. What happened next is the part people always seem most surprised by, though looking back I'm not sure why it surprised me. My father was a man who, when he didn't have the words for something, found a different instrument. The instrument this time was a wellness check. He called the non-emergency police line and told them he hadn't been able to reach his daughter and was concerned about her safety. The officer who knocked on our door was apologetic and professional. He explained the situation in about 30 seconds. I showed him I was fine, gave him my name, and thanked him. He left. I stood in the doorway for a moment after he walked back to his cruiser. Marcus came up behind me. "Are you okay?" I thought about it seriously. "I'm not surprised," I said. "That's the part that's actually sad. That's the part that's actually sad. I'm not surprised." We closed the door. I called Priya. She picked up on the second ring and I told her what had happened, and she was quiet for exactly the right amount of time before she said, "What do you need?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Okay," she said. "I'm here." That night, Marcus and I sat on the back porch for a long time after dinner, not talking much. The neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street. The sky was that particular October dark that makes everything feel both very small and very large at the same time. "I think I need to stop waiting for them to become different people," I said. He reached over and took my hand. "I think that's probably right," he said. "I want to tell the next part honestly, without making it neater than it was. I didn't speak to my parents for the better part of 8 months. Devin called me occasionally, carefully, walking the line the way middle people always do. He never asked me to reconcile. He never took sides. He just called and talked about his kids and the football season, and I was grateful for him in a way I didn't always remember to say. My mother sent a card on my birthday in March. Inside, she had written, "Thinking of you. Always." Nothing else, no apology, but something in the handwriting, the way she pressed hard on the pen, the way she'd written it and then stopped, made me think she'd started and stopped a number of times before settling on those 4 words. I put the card on the windowsill in the kitchen. I didn't throw it away. Spring came and Tyler's wedding happened without us. I thought about it on the day, a Saturday in May, and then I went to the farmer's market with Marcus and bought tomato plants, and we came home and put them in the backyard, and I felt, not happy exactly, but settled, like someone who has made a decision and is living inside it. In July, Devin called with a different kind of voice. "Dad had a heart attack," he said. "He's at Centaura. It happened this morning." I was in the car in a parking lot outside a grocery store. I sat very still. Is he's? He's. She's. Is he's stable? They think he's going to be okay. But Lauren. He paused. "He's asking for you." I called Marcus. He said he'd meet me there. The drive to Chesapeake was 2.5 hours. I had made that drive hundreds of times in my life. Coming home from college, from base, from every place I had ever left, and I had never once not known what I was driving toward. This time I didn't know. I drove and listened to the radio and turned it off, and drove in silence and turned it back on. My mother was in the waiting room when I arrived. She stood up when she saw me. She didn't reach for me right away. We looked at each other across the linoleum for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then she crossed the room and put her arms around me, and I let her. And she was smaller than I remembered, which happens sometimes with parents. And she held on longer than I expected. She didn't say she was sorry, not in those words. What she said into my shoulder was, "I should have been there." I knew she meant the wedding, and I knew that was as close as she could get, for now. "I know," I said. My father was in a hospital bed with 2 monitors and an IV line, and he looked, for the first time in my life, like a man who was aware of his own limits. That was strange to see. It changed the shape of the room. He looked at me for a long time when I walked in. Marcus waited in the doorway. I came and stood beside the bed. "You came," my father said. "Of course I came." He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. His hands had always been very capable, very certain. Hands that fixed things, built things, managed things, built things, managed things. "I didn't handle it well," he said. "Any of it." He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He was looking at the window. I understood that. Some things are easier to say to a window. No, I said. You didn't. Your mother and I should have been there. Yes, you should have. I wasn't going to make it easier than it was. But I wasn't going to make it harder than it had to be either, because he was in a hospital bed and he was my father, and those two things were both true at the same time, the way things are. Marcus seems like a good man, he said. He is, I said. He's a very good man. My father nodded again. He was quiet for a while. The monitor beeped its steady, neutral rhythm. I'm glad you came, he said. Me too, I said. Me too, I said. And I meant it. He recovered. The next 6 months were careful and slow. Phone calls that felt like learning a language neither of us had been taught. Sunday dinners I attended sometimes and didn't. Other times, a gradual and imperfect renegotiation of who we were to each other now. My father never fully became a different man. I don't think I was waiting for that anymore. What changed was smaller and more real. The way he asked Marcus about work and actually listened to the answer. The way he didn't offer opinions about things he hadn't been invited into. The way he called me on a random Wednesday in November just to say that Devon's youngest had said something funny and he'd wanted to tell someone. That was the call I think about the most. Not the hospital room, not the apology at the window, just that Wednesday call about something small that he wanted to share with me. My mother came to our house for Christmas that year. She brought her sweet potato casserole and walked through our rooms the way mothers do, touching things lightly, taking inventory. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me and Marcus move around each other, handing things back and forth, finishing each other's sentences, and she had an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, when Marcus had gone to answer the door for Priya, she said to me quietly, "You built something good." "We did," I said. She nodded. She turned back to her casserole. I let her have the last word on that one. I don't think there's a clean lesson at the end of something like this. I've heard people say that forgiveness is for yourself, not the other person, and I think that's true in the way that most useful truths are. Partial, complicated, not the whole story. What I know is that I married a man who showed up, that when I walked down an aisle alone, it turned out I wasn't actually alone. That Priya drove from Nashville without being asked twice. That Devon called and kept calling. That my father in a hospital room in July looked at a window and found a few words that cost him something to say. I know that my mother, on a December afternoon in my kitchen, said you built something good and that she was right. There are days when I think about the version of this story where I spent years waiting for my parents to walk through the door and become who I needed them to be, and how long that could have gone on. I stopped waiting. That was the whole thing. That was the choice. I didn't stop loving them. I just stopped putting my life on hold for permission that was never going to come. The tomatoes we planted in the backyard last spring grew taller than I expected. Marcus strung them up with twine along the back fence, careful and patient, the way he does everything. We had more than we could eat. We brought bags of them to the neighbors, to Priya when she visited, to Devon's family when they came for the 4th of July. My father ate one standing in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon in August, right off the vines, squinting in the sunlight. Not bad, he said. From him, that was something. From him, that was quite a lot. I've thought a lot about what actually changed the day I sent that $1. Not what it meant to my father. I couldn't control that. But what it meant to me, it meant I had stopped pretending the ledger was balanced when it wasn't. That's a small thing that takes a long time to do. I spent years believing that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, if I just gave the situation more time and more grace, something would shift. My father would soften. My mother would speak up. The family I had inside my head, the one that showed up, that asked questions, that made room, would eventually match the one that actually existed. I was very disciplined about that belief. I had survived 2 deployments on discipline. I thought I could outlast this too. What I didn't understand then is that patience, applied to the wrong thing, isn't a virtue. It's just a longer way of hurting yourself. The morning after Marcus and I talked, the night we sat at the kitchen table and he asked me what I actually wanted, underneath everything, I woke up and I felt different. Not healed, not resolved, just done waiting for a permission that was never going to come. There's a specific kind of clarity that arrives when you finally stop arguing with reality. It's quiet. It doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like solid ground. What I know now is that the people who show up tell you who they are just as clearly as the people who don't. Priya drove from Nashville. She didn't ask if I needed her, she just came. Marcus updated that document for 14 months, quietly, without pressure. Devin kept calling, kept walking that careful line, kept choosing connection over comfort. These were not grand gestures. They were just consistent ones. And consistency, I think, is the only real proof of anything. My father was not a villain. I want to say that clearly because the easy version of this story would make him one. He was a man who loved through control because that was the only instrument he'd ever been given, and when I stopped being something he could manage, he didn't know what to do with the love that was left. That's a tragedy. It's just not one I could fix for him. What I could do was decide what kind of person I was going to be on the other side of it, whether I was going to let the wound make me smaller, or whether I was going to build something anyway, something real, something mine. The tomatoes are back this year. Marcus put in a second row along the fence. My father came over in August and stood in the yard and didn't say much, but he stayed longer than he needed to. My mother texted me a photo of a recipe she wanted to try for Christmas. Devin's youngest called Marcus Uncle M for the first time, and Marcus looked like he'd been handed something precious. None of this is perfect. None of it erases what happened. But it's real, and it's ours. And we built it. That, I've decided, is enough. That is more than enough.